Report.
We just can't see your screen. That's another thing. So maybe for
Okay, what about now?
Yes.
Yeah, is everything okay?
Yeah. Still pretty echoey.
Sorry about that.
It's just a little echoey. Are you sure you don't have another Zoom tab open, David? Just quickly.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Well, it's too echoey for me.
Oh, is it echoey?
Yeah, it's echoing. Your voice is like coming in.
My eardrums are ringing.
Yeah, it's not like so echoey, but it's definitely there.
Am I still echoey?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always echoing. I guess this is just the old Zoom.
Oh, did you open a Zoom application on the internet? You know how there's Zoom Live and then there's Zoom on your laptop? Just check that just in case.
Oh, I'm using the Zoom tab on my...
Okay, if you're using both your Zoom tab on the internet and the Zoom application, that's another reason. Just make sure one of them's shut.
Am I still echoing? I just took off my AirPods.
Okay, it's not echoing anymore.
Okay.
It was the AirPods.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
We can see your screen. Everything's fine.
Sorry about that. Anyways, so this is why over time when we take medicines, if we take antibiotics for a long period of time, eventually we can see that the bacteria will adapt and, you know, as we said, mutate from this antibiotic and start reproducing bacteria that are resistant to these medicines, which is why sometimes we need to switch it up for the new strains of bacteria. So yeah, we basically just went over this. The bacteria will mutate and allow them to survive and live on to reproduce and become immune to the medicine that we give it. So now we'll be watching a short video on natural selection. It's a crash course if any of you guys know. Do we have time for a video and an activity?
It's 11:36. How long is the crash course?
The crash course is around 10 minutes.
Okay.
I love crash course. Play it.
That should be cool.
Yeah, I think it will be fine. Okay.
No. Oh.
No, not right now.
The crash course. We're on Kahoot right now.
Oh wait, why am I on Kahoot? Okay.
Yeah, I like crash course.
Can you tell me the pin? Crash course.
Hi, I'm Hank, and I'm here.
Can you guys hear
Let's
that?
pretend for a moment
Yes, you
that
are.
It's good.
Wait, could you guys hear the video?
Yes.
No, I
Can you turn
can't
the
hear
volume
it.
a bit?
Can you turn the video sound like all the way up, maybe?
Yeah, I can't hear that much.
I can hear it.
Okay, what about?
a peppered moth. Now let's pretend that I'm living in London, the earth.
Could you guys hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear it.
1800s, right as the Industrial Revolution is starting. Life
He's
is
echoing.
my light-colored body can blend in with the light-colored lichens and tree bark, which means that birds have a hard time seeing me, and which means that I...
Something happened.
Yeah, we
can
can hear it.
anything.
Wait, I don't.
You're muted.
Maybe if it's not like there, we can just.
Who muted this?
I'm sorry.
Just quickly unmute.
all these
Am I good now?
Yeah, we can hear it. You just
old factories spewing soot into the air, and suddenly all the trees have gone from looking like this to looking like this. So thanks to the soot-covered everything, I've got problems. But you know who doesn't have problems? My brother. He looks like this. Yeah, he has a different form of the gene that affects pigmentation. Moths like him represent about 2% of all the peppered moths at the start of the Industrial Revolution, but by 1895, it'll be 95%. Why? Well, you're probably already guessing. As the environment gets dirtier, darker moths will be eaten less often, and therefore we'll have more opportunities to make baby moths, while the white ones will get eaten more, so over time the black-colored trait will become more common. As for me, means it's a wonderful example of natural selection, the process by which certain inherited traits make it easier for some individuals to thrive and multiply, changing the genetic makeup of populations over time. For this revelation, which remains one of the most important revelations in biology, we have to thank Charles Darwin, who first identified this process in his revolutionary 1859 book on the origin of species by natural selection. Now, lots of factors play a role in how species change over time, including mutation, migration, random changes in how frequently some alleles show up, a process known as genetic drift. But natural selection is the most powerful and most important cause of evolutionary change, which is why today we're going to talk about the principles behind it and the different ways in which it works. Darwin came to understand the process of natural selection because he spent his adult life, even most of his childhood, obsessed with observing nature. He studied barnacles, earthworms, birds, rocks, tortoises, fossils, fish, insects, and to some extent, even his own family. And I'll get back to that in a bit. But it was during Darwin's famous voyage on the HMS Beagle in the 1830s, a surveying expedition around the world, that he began to formulate this theory. Darwin was able to study all kinds of organisms, and he kept amazing journals. Looking back on his notes, he hit upon a couple of particularly important factors in species survival. One of them was the many examples of adaptations he noticed on his journey, the ways in which organisms seem to be ideally shaped to enhance their survival and reproduction in specific environments. Maybe the most famous example of these were the variations of beaks Darwin observed among the finches in the remote Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America. He observed more than a dozen closely related finch species, all of which were quite similar to mainland finch species. But each island species had different shaped and sized beaks that were adapted to the food available specifically on each island. If there were hard seeds, the beaks were thick. If there were insects, the beaks were skinny and pointed. If there were cactus fruit, the beaks were sharp, puncture the fruit skin. These superior inherited traits led Darwin to another idea. The finches increased fitness for their environment. That is, their relative ability to survive and create offspring. Explaining the effects of adaptation and relative fitness would become central to Darwin's idea of natural selection. And today, we often define natural selection and describe how it drives evolutionary change by four basic principles based on Darwin's observations. The first principle is that different members of a population have all kinds of individual variations. These characteristics, whether they're body size, hair color, blood type, facial markings, metabolisms, reflexes, they're called phenotypes. The second is that many of these variations are heritable and can be passed on to offspring. If a trait happens to be favorable, it does future generations no good if it can't be passed on. Third, and this one tends to get glossed over, interesting, is Darwin's observation that populations can often have way more offspring than resources like food and water can support. This leads to what Darwin called the struggle for existence. He was inspired here by the work of Thomas Malthus, an economist who wrote that when human populations get too big, we get things like plague and famine and wars, and then only some of us survive and continue to reproduce. If you missed the SciShow Infusion that we did on human overpopulation today and Malthus's predictions, you should check it out now. This finally leads to the last principle of natural selection, which is that given all of this competition for resources, heritable traits that affect individuals' fitness can lead to variations in their survival and reproductive rates. It's just another way of saying that those with favorable traits are more likely to come out on top and will be more successful with their baby making. So in order to wrap all these principles together, in order for natural selection to take place, a population has to have variations, some of which are heritable. And when a variation makes an organism more competitive, that variation will tend to be selected. Like with the peppered moth. It survived because there was a variation within the species, the dark coloration, which was heritable, and in turn allowed every moth that inherited that trait to better survive the hungry birds of London. But notice how this works. A single variation in a single organism is only the very beginning of the process. The key is that individuals don't evolve. Instead, natural selection produces evolutionary change because it changes the genetic composition of entire populations. And that occurs through interactions between individuals and their environment. Let's get back to Darwin for a minute. In 1870, Darwin wrote to his neighbor and parliamentarian, John Lubbock, requesting that a question be added to England's census regarding the frequency of cousins marrying and the health of their offspring. His request was denied, but the question was something that weighed heavily on Darwin's mind because he was married to Emma Wedgwood, who happened to be his first cousin. Her grandfather was Josiah Wedgwood, founder of the company that remains famous for its pottery in China, and he was also Darwin's grandfather. In fact, much of Darwin's family tree was complicated. His marriage to Emma was far from the first Wedgwood-Darwin pairing. Darwin's maternal grandparents and mother were also Wedgwoods, and there were several other marriages between cousins in the family, though not always between those two families. So Darwin, and to a greater extent his children, carried more genetic material of Wedgwood origin than Darwinian. And this caused some problems, the likes of which Darwin was all too aware thanks to his own scientific research. Darwin, of course, spent time studying the effects of crossbreeding and inbreeding in plants and animals, noting that consanguineous pairs often resulted in weaker and sickly descendants, and the same was true of his family. Emma and Charles had 10 children, 3 of whom died in childhood from infectious disease, which is more likely to be contracted by those with high levels of inbreeding. And none of Darwin's 7 other children had any deformity.
Who's what?
Shivani, did you have a question?
He literally had 7 living children?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
But not much for that time. They had lots of children back then.
Yeah, back then, yeah, not a lot of kids survived, so they had a lot.
Now the maximum is 4 children.
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You have something, Teresa?
no, I was just saying the
And
video.
by the way, for
He noted that they
Yeah.
were not very robust, and the 3 of them were unable to have children of their own, likely another effect of inbreeding. Now, so far we've been talking about natural selection in terms of physical characteristics, like beak shape or coloration, but it's important to understand that it's not just an organism's physical form or its phenotype that's changing, but its essential genetic form or its genotype. The heritable variations we've been talking about are a function of the alleles that organisms are carrying around. And as organisms become more successful, evolutionarily speaking, by surviving in larger numbers for longer and having more kids, that means that the alleles that mark their variation become more frequent. But these changes can come about in different ways, and to understand how, let's walk through the different modes of selection. The mode we've been talking about for much of this episode is an example of directional selection, which is when a favored trait is at one extreme end of the range of traits, like from short to tall or white to black or blind to having super night goggle vision. Over time, this leads to distinct changes in the frequency of that expressed trait in a population when a single phenotype is favored. So our peppered moth is an example of a population's trait distribution shifting toward one extreme. Almost all whitish moths to the other extreme, almost all blackish. Another awesome example is giraffes' necks. They've gotten really long over time because there was selection pressure against short necks, which couldn't reach all of those delicious leaves. But there's also stabilizing selection, which selects against extreme phenotypes and instead favors the majority that are well adapted to an environment. An example that's often used is a human's birth weight. Very small babies have a harder time defending themselves from infections and staying warm, but very large babies are too large to deliver naturally. Because of this, the survival rate for babies has historically been higher for those in middle weight range, which helps stabilize the average birth weight, at least until cesarean sections became as common as bad tattoos. So what happens when the environment favors extreme traits at both ends of the spectrum while selecting against common traits? That's disruptive selection. Now, examples of this are rare, but scientists think that they found an instance of it in 2008 in a lake full of tiny crustaceans called daphnia. So the population was hit with an epidemic of a yeast parasite, and after about a half dozen generations, variants had emerged in how the daphnia responded to the parasite. Some became less susceptible to the yeast, but were smaller and had fewer offspring. The others actually became more susceptible, but were bigger and able to reproduce more, at least while they were still alive. So there were 2 traits that were being selected for, both in extremes and both to the exclusion of each other: susceptibility and fecundity. If you got one, you didn't get the other. Also an interesting example of selection being driven by a parasite. Now, while these are the main ways that selective pressures can affect populations, those pressures can also come from factors other than environmental ones like food supply or predators or parasites. There's also sexual selection, another concept introduced by Darwin and described in The Origin of Species as depending not on a struggle for existence, but a struggle between individuals of the same sex, generally the males, for the possession of the other sex. Basically, for individuals to maximize their fitness, they not only need to survive, but they also need to reproduce more And they can do that one or two ways. One, they can make themselves attractive to the opposite sex. Or two, they can go for the upper hand by intimidating, deterring, or defeating the same-sex rivals. The first of these strategies is how we ended up with this. I mean, the peacock tail isn't exactly camouflage. But the more impressive the tail, the better the chances a male will find a mate and will pass its genes to the next generation. Sad-looking peacock tails will diminish over generations, making it a good example of directional sexual selection. The other strategy involves fighting, or at least looking like you want to fight for the privilege of mating, which tends to select for bigger or stronger or meaner-looking mates. And finally, thanks to us humans, there are also unnatural forms of selection, and we call that artificial selection. People have been artificially selecting plants and animals for thousands of years, and Darwin spent a lot of time in The Origin of Species talking about breeding of pigeons, of cattle, and of plants to demonstrate the principles of selection. We encourage the selection of some traits and discourage others. That's how we got grains that produce all those nutrients. Which is how we managed to turn the gray wolf into domesticated dogs that can look like this or like that. Two of my favorite examples of artificial selection. Now these are different breeds of dogs. Where are you going? No. But they're still both dogs. They're the same species. Technically, a corgi and a greyhound could get together and have a baby dog, though it would be a weird looking dog. But what happens when selection makes populations so different that they can't even be the same species anymore? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next episode on Crash Course Biology. How one species can turn into another species. In the meantime, feel free to review what we've gone over today, ask us questions.
So basically that's it. Now we're going to do some review. I don't know how to get out of this. Escape? Okay. So I'm gonna post. Copy. Oops. I'm gonna paste this Kahoot link in the chat box of the Zoom call, and you guys can open it on another tab, and then yeah.
David, I think you have to share your screen though. I did a Kahoot last week.
Yeah.
And you have to share your screen. We can only see we can only have the answer options, but the question will be on your screen, so you have to share your screen.
Oh, okay. Can you guys try this link first to see if it even loads onto your screen? It's in the chat box of the Zoom call. I put it in there.
Wait, instead of giving us the link, David, probably just send us the ID instead, because then we can see the answers.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, great idea, Carissa. That's what I was going to suggest as well.
Why don't you delete the, you click on the link instead, and then we could
David, if you go and click on the link yourself, and then that'll share like you're going to play the game. Share your screen.
Now share your screen, David.
Okay.
Share your screen with the Kahoot page, not on your Google site anymore.
Okay.
If that
And
makes
you
sense.
also might want to unshare your computer sound so that we don't hear your Kahoot
Yes,
sound in the background. Ah, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, so why don't you put the game pin in the, or I'll just put it in. Guys, I'm putting the game pin in the chat box, 278423, and you can see it as well. That's the game chat. Just go on kahoot.it, and don't click on the first link David sent in the chat box. So otherwise you'll tend to see the answer.
Yeah, don't click on that.
I don't know if you can delete it or no.
Let me try to delete it.
278423.
Oh, I can't delete it.
Okay, we have 7 people in. Oh, there are 12 participants, so maybe a few people left. I think we had like 15 earlier. Prisha, are you able to join? Shivani and Prisha, are you able to join?
Trying.
Okay, good.
Because I'm trying to minimize my screen so I can see the page and the other page.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you could try that, or you could just, I'm just doing like, I'm clicking the Zoom link window.
I did it.
Okay. So we have Okay, so we'll wait for Prisha and Shivani. Is everything good? Shivani? Oh, I think she might be gone.
www. dot
Kahoot.it, and then type in the 278423.
Okay.
game pin
The game
is
pin
278.
423. 278423. That's the game pin. Oh, okay, Gori is there. Gurjap is there. Jack is there. Prisha, is everything, were you able to get in?
Yeah,
Good job. And then, Shivani, oh, you're muted.
I am not able to get in.
You're not able to get in?
But I have to do something real quick.
Do you need help getting in or something?
Not right now. Right now I have to do something. I'll let you know when I need.
We're gonna go ahead and get started.
Okay. So sorry, we'll just go ahead and get started because there is limited time, but yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll just see the questions on David's shared screen on Zoom, and then you'll answer on the Kahoot screen.
So, what was the survival of fittest and evolution proposed? What scientist was it proposed by?
Oh, I'm also playing, so yeah. Good job. It wasn't Hawking, no. Charles Darwin proposed survival of the fittest and evolution with the golden finch, as we saw. But a lot of you guys got that correct, so good job.
Good job.
Oh, some of you are beating me.
So, better adapted organisms survive to pass traits along to offspring.
Evolution, triangle, diamond, natural selection, yellow circle, extinction, or square, artificial selection. Yes, so natural selection is when organisms are adapted to pass traits to their offspring, right? Because in essence, the circumstances naturally select or favor these organisms. Evolution can be a result of natural selection. But yeah. Oh my gosh, you guys are beating me. I'm going easy. How about that? Multi-select.
Oh, it's multi-select?
Yes.
Oops. I think that's a mistake on my part. But what word describes a trait that helps an organism survive in its environment?
Okay, so David said it was a mistake, so only choose one answer. Because the multi-select might have been a mistake, David said.
Yeah, it's a mistake. Yeah, camouflage might be an example, but the word that describes the ability for an organism to survive in an environment is more correlated with adaptation. It's a better term.
Camouflage is an example. Adaptation is the word which describes the particular trait helping an organism survive in its environment. So yeah.
Whoa.
Wow, I am losing.
So which following means change over time? This was, we went over this in the beginning of the PowerPoint.
So evolution. Evolution means the change of organisms over time, either through result of natural selection. Fitness is not change over time. Fitness is the likelihood of an organism either surviving or better off reproducing in an environment, but evolution is change over time. So yeah.
Wow, good job.
Oh, this is.
So yeah. Is Charles Darwin your ancestor? No, but you know the word is ancestor. So like our grandparents, our great great grandparents, those are people who are related to us who lived before us and passed down their traits to us. Um,
Oh,
good job, Lisa. Preserved remains or traces of ancient organisms. Yeah, so it's not adaptation. It's a fossil. You know, the bones of like dinosaurs or animals in the past. Good job. The information provided by fossils about the Earth's history. You kind of infer, but
We learned this in science class.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
We learned like about natural selection and evolution and all of that stuff.
What grade are you in?
I'm going to seventh, but I was in sixth.
Oh, well, that's cool. What's the formation of new species? Yeah, so it's actually a speciation. You know, so over time the traits become so different from the others, it actually becomes its own species. So yeah, speciation, good job. Um, so basically another word for natural selection. If you cut that in the PowerPoint. Yeah, so survival of the fittest, as you said, is another word for natural selection. It's basically the best suited, the organisms who are best suited for the environment are the most likely to reproduce. There almost done. 5 more questions. Of an animal that lives in the snowy tundra, so a very snowy place and cold. So which trait would be the best trait that animal that lives there could have? Yeah, thick coat. That will be the cold, yeah. Good job. So who created natural selection? We kind of went over this before, but it's very important you know who this is. Yeah. Okay. Good job, Avi.
We're all holding strong.
This is a kind of tricky question. Yeah, so this is a little tricky. Inherited, remember, inherited is the genetics. So it's what the parent passes off to their offspring. So they pass on the good genes that they had onto their children rather than acquired, which is what you gain throughout your life and really not inherited. It's different. Yeah, you're on fire. Which is not a process of natural selection. So, you know, number of things that we went over before? This is a tricky one. Oh yeah. So if you remember the slide that we had named the process of natural selection, I went over a number of terms and descriptions of natural selection. Genetics was not one of them. Yeah, that was a little hard. Okay. 2 more questions. What was the book Darwin wrote about natural selection? This is the main one, the most popular one. The one that had his theory. Yeah, so it's The Origin of Species by Natural Selection, which was the book that Darwin wrote. Okay, last question. Are you guys ready? Okay. This is a true or false. Evolution takes place over a short period of time. Is this true or is this false? Generally. Yeah, so evolution is something that usually takes a very long time to see in a species or in a group of organisms. So yeah, it takes generations and generations, which could be thousands of or millions of years actually. So yeah, our winner, third is Parisa, Sanaya. Good job, Avi. Yeah, thanks for playing.
You all did really well, so that's really good.
Yeah,
I got one question wrong because I was looking at the wrong option, but yeah.
yeah, okay. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have for today. Thank you guys for joining. Okay, let me stop sharing.
Thanks for leading, David.
Yeah, of course.
And thanks everyone for being so interactive. I loved our discussion today.
Perfect.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you guys.
Bye.